Welcome to my channel. Today, we're embarking on a journey through history, one filled with ambition, conflict, the birth of nations. Imagine a bright, swirling canvas of color behind these words, inviting you to explore the dramatic events that shaped North America as we know it. Whether you're a history buff or just curious about the past, you're in the right place. Let's dive in and discover how two powerful nations found themselves on a collision course that would forever change the continent. In the early 1840s, North America was a continent of vast, unmapped territories. It was a land of immense promise and, simmering conflict. To the north, the young and ambitious United States was expanding at a remarkable pace. Its people were filled with a restless energy, always looking westward toward the horizon. They saw open land as their birthright, farms, towns, democratic ideals. This was a nation forged in revolution, convinced of its own exceptional purpose. And it was growing stronger with each passing year. South of the Rio Grande, another republic was struggling to find its footing. Mexico had won its independence from Spain only 2 decades earlier. But its path had been difficult. Political instability, internal conflicts, economic troubles. It was a vast nation stretching from the jungles of the Yucatan to the sun-drenched lands of California. Holding this territory together was a monumental challenge. The Mexican people were proud and resilient, determined to protect their sovereignty. These two nations were neighbors, born from similar struggles for independence. But they were separated by more than just a river, divided by language, divided by religion, divided by profoundly different visions for the continent's future. The United States saw westward expansion as natural, inevitable growth. For Mexico, that expansion threatened national existence. California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas. The air was thick with tension. Every diplomatic exchange, every border dispute, every settlement of American pioneers on Mexican land. It was a clash of two worlds, two destinies colliding. One nation driven by unshakable belief in future growth, the other fighting to preserve its present. The stage was being set to redefine the map of North America and the soul of both countries. Now, the storm was gathering and few could see a way to avoid it. In the bustling cities and quiet farmlands of America, a powerful idea was taking hold. It was a concept known as manifest destiny. The belief that the United States was divinely ordained to expand across the entire continent from the Atlantic to the Pacific. More than a political doctrine, it was a popular movement, a quasi-religious conviction that fueled the nation's westward drive. Newspaper editors, politicians, ordinary citizens all spoke of it as a clear and obvious truth. Spreading American liberty and institutions, they argued, was not just an opportunity. It was a sacred duty. This potent ideology turned American eyes toward the vast territories owned by Mexico. Texas, New Mexico, California were portrayed as empty and underdeveloped, waiting for American enterprise. Many in the U.S. viewed Mexico as weak and disorganized. The annexation of Texas in 1845 was seen as the logical fulfillment of destiny. But Mexico City saw it differently. The Mexican government and its people viewed American appetite for land with growing alarm and indignation. The loss of Texas was a national humiliation, a wound that refused to heal. They saw manifest destiny as an excuse for theft and imperial ambition. Mexican leaders vowed to prevent further encroachment. Not one more inch would be surrendered without a fight. The story of the Mexican-American War is often told as a simple tale of American triumph. It's the story of a swift and decisive military victory that added a vast new empire to the United States. But beneath that straightforward narrative lies a more complicated, troubling set of questions. Was this truly a war of destiny? A necessary chapter in American progress? Or was it a calculated war of aggression, launched by a stronger nation against a weaker neighbor to seize its lands? This question haunted the American conscience even as the war was fought. Many Americans, including a young congressman from Illinois named Abraham Lincoln, openly questioned the motives and the morality of the conflict. They saw the war as an unjust land grab, driven by the greed of Southern slaveholders expanding slavery into new territories. On the other side, proponents defended the war as righteous and necessary. They pointed to Mexico's political instability. They cited unpaid debts. To them, the war was about protecting American interests and bringing progress to a region they claimed was languishing. The war forced the nation to confront contradictions between democratic ideals and expansionist ambitions. As we look back, we must ask, how did these tensions erupt into open warfare? Who were the men who led the armies? What was the true cost? In land, in lives, and in the very soul of two nations, these are the questions we will explore. The road to war began not on a battlefield, but in the fertile lands of Texas. In the 1820s, the Mexican government invited American settlers to come. Led by men like Stephen F. Austin, thousands of Americans eagerly accepted the offer. They were drawn by the promise of cheap land. They were drawn by the promise of a new life. But these settlers brought with them their own language, their Protestant faith, and crucially, their institution of slavery. These cultural differences created immediate friction with their Mexican hosts, Catholic, Spanish-speaking, and who had officially abolished slavery. Over the next decade, tensions between the American settlers and the Mexican government steadily grew. Attempts by the central government to exert more control, banning further American immigration, enforcing the anti-slavery laws, were met with fierce resistance. In 1836, these simmering tensions boiled over into open rebellion. The Texans declared their independence from Mexico. The conflict was short but brutal: heroic defeat at the Alamo, decisive Texan victory at the Battle of San Jacinto. The Republic of Texas was born, a Lone Star nation standing alone on the continent. For nearly a decade, it existed as an independent country. Most Texans were American by birth, and their ultimate goal was not just independence from Mexico, but annexation by the United States. Mexico never officially recognized the independence of Texas. To the government in Mexico City, Texas was a rebellious province that would one day be brought back under its control. They warned the United States repeatedly, and in no uncertain terms. Any attempt by Washington to annex Texas would be considered a declaration of war. The Lone Star Republic was not just a symbol of Texan independence. It was a ticking time bomb, placed directly on the border between two proud and increasingly hostile powers. The question was not if it would explode, but when. The election of James K. Polk as the 11th President of the United States in 1844 was, honestly, a real turning point. Polk was a firm believer in manifest destiny, and he had a clear, four-point plan. One of his primary goals was the annexation of Texas. Another was the acquisition of California and the vast New Mexico territory from Mexico. Polk was a man in a hurry, determined to reshape the map of the continent, and he was willing to use every tool at his disposal, whether it be diplomacy or force. Shortly after Polk took office, the United States formally annexed the Republic of Texas. True to its word, the Mexican government immediately broke off diplomatic relations with the United States. He dispatched a diplomat named John Slidell to Mexico City to offer to purchase California and New Mexico. The Mexican government, feeling insulted and pressured, refused to even receive Slidell. The failure of the Slidell mission gave Polk the pretext he was looking for. With the door to diplomacy slammed shut, Polk turned to a more coercive strategy. He ordered American troops under the command of General Zachary Taylor to move south from their position on the Nueces River and to take up a new position on the north bank of the Rio Grande. It was a deliberate, provocative move into territory that Mexico considered its own. The two armies now faced each other across the muddy waters of the river. On April 25, 1846, the spark finally ignited the powder keg. A Mexican cavalry unit crossed the Rio Grande and ambushed a patrol of 63 American dragoons. News of the Thornton affair was rushed by horseback to Washington, D.C. It was exactly the incident President Polk had been waiting for. He declared that Mexico has passed the boundary of the United States, has invaded our territory, and shed American blood upon the American soil. On May 13, 1846, Congress overwhelmingly voted to declare war on Mexico. The whispers of war had become the roar of cannons. General Zachary Taylor, a gruff 61-year-old career soldier, found himself at the forefront of the American invasion. Known to his men as Old Rough and Ready, he was steady, determined, and inspired great loyalty. The two armies met on May 8, 1846, on a flat, grassy plain called Palo Alto. The Americans were outnumbered, but they held a decisive technological advantage. Their light mobile field artillery, flying artillery, dominated the field. The next day, the retreating Mexican army made a stand at Resaca de la Palma. Fighting there was chaotic, hand-to-hand. His next target was the heavily fortified city of Monterrey. The battle for Monterrey was brutal, street-to-street fighting. American volunteers had to fight house to house. After 3 days of bloody urban combat, the Mexican general offered to surrender. Taylor, respecting his opponent's bravery and facing heavy losses, agreed. President Polk was absolutely furious with the terms of surrender at Monterrey. To create this new army, Polk stripped Taylor of most of his best troops. The wily Mexican general Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna saw a golden opportunity. His plan was simple and audacious: to surprise and annihilate Taylor's small, isolated force. In February 1847, Santa Anna's army arrived near a mountain pass called Buena Vista. Taylor's famous defiant reply was, "I beg leave to say that I decline acceding to your request." The battle that began the next morning was the largest and bloodiest of the war. For 2 days, Taylor's small army desperately clung to their positions against overwhelming odds. According to legend, Taylor coolly ordered, "A little more grape, Captain Bragg." The cannons, loaded with deadly anti-personnel rounds, blasted the advancing Mexican columns, stopping the attack and saving the day. By nightfall, Santa Anna had no choice but to retreat. The Battle of Buena Vista was a stunning American victory against impossible odds, and it cemented Zachary Taylor's status as a legendary American hero. The man chosen to lead this daring campaign was General Winfield Scott, a meticulous planner, a stickler for discipline. Scott was perhaps the most capable American general of his generation. In March 1847, a massive American flotilla appeared off the coast of Veracruz. In a brilliantly executed operation, he landed his entire army on the beaches south of the city without a single loss of life. With his army safely ashore, Scott surrounded Veracruz and laid siege. Scott began a relentless 20-day bombardment. Hundreds of civilians were killed or wounded. Finally, on March 29, 1847, the Mexican commander had no choice but to surrender. It opened the road to Mexico City. General Scott began his march inland. Scott had a secret weapon, a brilliant staff of young engineers, including Captain Robert E. Lee. Lee led a daring reconnaissance, found a hidden path that let the Americans flank the Mexican defenses. In August 1847, hard-fought battles at Contreras and Churubusco saw Scott systematically defeat the outer defenses. Fighting was intense. The final obstacle, Chapultepec Castle. On September 13, 1847, American forces launched a frontal assault. Young cadets, some as young as 13, fought bravely, the Niños heroes. Chapultepec fell, the final gates were stormed. On September 14, 1847, Scott and the U.S. Army marched into the Grand Plaza. The fighting was over. The capital had fallen. You know, the story of the Mexican-American War is often told through its dramatic battles. But honestly, the greatest killer in this conflict wasn't the enemy's musket ball or cannon fire. It was disease. The camps, man, they were just breeding grounds for yellow fever, dysentery, measles, smallpox. On those long marches, contaminated water sources led to relentless outbreaks of dysentery that sapped the strength of entire regiments. The constant threat of a slow, agonizing death far from home took a severe psychological toll. It was a miserable and inglorious way to die. Beyond the staggering death toll from disease, the war also saw high rates of desertion, particularly on the American side. Many soldiers were recent immigrants, with little loyalty to the American cause. Many felt alienated by the anti-Catholic, anti-immigrant prejudice they faced. Particularly Irish Catholics and German Catholics took up arms against their former comrades. Led by a man named John Riley, these deserters formed a highly effective and motivated fighting force for the Mexican army. As the war drew to a close, many members of the battalion were captured at the Battle of Churubusco. The punishment meted out was exceptionally brutal. 50 members of the St. Patrick's Battalion were sentenced to hang. They were executed at the precise moment that the American flag was finally raised over the fortress walls. The tragedies of the war, really, were not confined to the soldiers on the battlefield. For the Mexican people, the conflict was an invasion and occupation of their homeland. The bombardment of cities like Veracruz and Monterrey was not surgical. It was indiscriminate, destroying homes, churches, and markets. Life under military occupation was fraught with hardship and humiliation. Homes were commandeered for quarters, food was seized, livestock was seized. The war also ignited a brutal guerrilla conflict. Mexican citizens, known as guerrilleros, ambushed supply trains. The American response was often swift and brutal. In the end, the greatest tragedy for the Mexican people was the profound sense of national trauma and loss. The loss of half their national territory was a deep and lasting wound to the national psyche. At the center of the American war effort was President James K. Polk. On the front lines, General Zachary Taylor became the war's first hero. The architect of the war's final victory was General Winfield Scott. Dominating the Mexican political and military landscape was the enigmatic Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. In the halls of the United States Congress, a first-term Whig congressman from Illinois named Abraham Lincoln challenged President Polk's justification for the war. The transcendentalist writer and philosopher Henry David Thoreau was so disgusted by the war that he refused to pay his poll tax. The war officially ended on February 2nd, 1848, with the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Mexico was forced to cede more than 525,000 square miles to the United States. In a single stroke, the United States increased its territory by nearly a third, becoming a continental power from the Atlantic to the Pacific. 9 days before the treaty, James W. Marshall discovered gold at Sutter's Mill. News spread like wildfire, triggering the California gold rush of 1849. The economic benefits were immense and immediate. California gold fueled a massive boom. The Mexican-American War became one of the most profitable and transformative ventures in U.S. history. While the war brought vast new lands, it also unleashed a political firestorm that would ultimately threaten to tear the nation apart. The spoils of victory were a poisoned fruit. In 1846, a Pennsylvania congressman named David Wilmot attached a proviso to a war funding bill, stipulating that slavery should be forever banned from any territory acquired from Mexico. Southerners were outraged. It led to a series of increasingly fragile compromises like the Compromise of 1850, which admitted California as a free state, but included a harsh new fugitive slave law that infuriated Northerners. In a profound and tragic irony, the war that was meant to secure America's destiny ultimately placed the nation on the path to its greatest crisis. The conflict served as a training ground for a generation of officers, Robert E. Lee, Ulysses S. Grant, who would soon face each other across the battlefields of the Civil War. The victorious Union, seemingly at the height of its power in 1848, was in fact a house dividing against itself, just a dozen years away from a catastrophic and bloody reckoning. Ultimately, the war altered two nations' character and trajectory. It locked the U.S. and Mexico into an unequal, complex relationship shaping politics, culture, and demographics today. To understand it is to understand how the modern Americas formed, where the lines of destiny and conquest were drawn, echoes still heard across the Rio Grande. As we close this chapter on the intertwined destinies of two nations, we want to thank you for joining us on this journey through history. If you found this story compelling, please remember to like and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating explorations. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe.